Ian Buruma, welkom. Geboren in Nederland, maar je woont al heel lang in New York natuurlijk. Historicus. En Julius Krein, welcome. Editor-in-chief of the political conservative magazine American Affairs. Let's start with Ian. First of all, New York, this day, when the city woke up and heard at 11:30 a.m. that President-elect was Joe Biden, what changed in New York? What did you see on the streets?
Well, a slightly sullen, depressed mood that's been here now for 4 years. It was as though within 5 minutes the mood lifted. And I could hear cheering outside in the streets just minutes before it was announced by the New York Times on my computer screen. So there were a lot of smiles on a lot of people's faces.
Yeah,
but this is a blue town. I mean,
it is easy here for Biden, but not so much for Donald Trump. Julius Krein, editor-in-chief, as I said, of American Affairs, actually a magazine for which the Dutch politician Thierry Baudet wrote an article in 2019, right? You know each other well?
That's correct.
Yes.
He wrote a review of Michel Houellebecq's latest novel, Serotonin, which I understand was quite controversial in your country.
I understood a lot of people from the Netherlands were looking for your website at the time, right?
They were, yeah.
First of all, what did you think when Joe Biden was announced being president-elect today?
I wasn't particularly surprised. Seems like it's, you know, he was of course favored to win by a large margin. He eked out a narrow victory, you know, the counts, the numbers had been trending in this direction for a few days now.
Right. You're a conservative. 4 years ago, you voted for Donald Trump, right? 4 years ago.
I did.
Yes. At the time, what did you think that Donald Trump would deliver to the country or bring to this country?
Fundamentally, the U.S. has suffered really since the end of the Cold War from a failed policy consensus, often called neoliberalism, globalism, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that the U.S. economy has been increasingly hollowed out, deindustrialized, financialized. Inequality is rampant, widening. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Trust in public institutions is collapsing. We had a failed elite consensus for a number of decades that needed to be changed. The Trump campaign was mainly a critique of that, but it was a necessary critique. I would say his administration, however, has largely failed to deliver on most of the issues of that campaign, with the partial exception of trade.
When did you lose your confidence in the president?
I think it was fairly early on. It was clear, to me at least, that he was more interested in sparking controversial media battles than in actually putting together the policy and implementing the policy to address the problems he raised in the campaign. Now, I don't want to say, you know, I really disdain the sort of circus atmosphere of American politics and the sort of blind partisanship. There are things that Donald Trump, you know, I would support that he did. There are many things that I would criticize. But the sort of binary sports team, right, spectator sport thing, I'm not very interested in.
No. Actually, what you are describing, Ian, we have seen in the first part of this show. You could say on one side, journalist David Corn, defending Joe Biden, Democratic Party, and we saw Diane just now. And these two worlds show the division in this country. Do you think, how big is this problem? How big is this problem to bring these worlds together?
Well, I think it'll be a huge problem, partly because of the social media and people are getting so much disinformation and being whipped, emotions are getting whipped up and so on. It would be more interesting, would have been more interesting if I could have vehemently disagreed with what I've just heard. I sort of more or less agree with his analysis. So I think that there is a real economic problem. I think there are a lot of people who have real grievances. And one thing that I found interesting reading the accounts this week was that a lot of people who were asked about why they voted for Trump, they didn't talk about immigration or China or QAnon. They talked about the economy.
Exactly.
And this is where Joe Biden can probably do something.
You wrote an op-ed article in NRC Handelsblad this Saturday, and it says in English, Trump is gone, but Trumpism isn't. If Trumpism isn't gone, what is it? And how would you like to get rid of it?
Well, it depends on what you mean by Trumpism. If it is conspiracy theories and that kind of stuff, obviously there's nothing good to come from that.
But I'm asking you, what do you mean by it, by Trumpism?
What I was referring to in that particular article were that there are certain grievances held by a large segment of the population who have lost their jobs, who feel left behind, not listened to, condescended to, and so on, and have real economic problems. And I think that the American government, as you said, in the last few decades have let these people down. And I think that there should be common ground between a democratic administration and at least some Republicans on the other side.
Julius, do you see an opportunity for Joe Biden, or do you think he has the talent, the capabilities to bridge this gap?
Biden will have very limited room to maneuver. But the one area actually that he does have potential to accomplish something would be to go to the themes of actually Trump's 2016 campaign, which in fact his campaign this time around did. Biden campaigned on a Buy American industrial policy plan and related issues, infrastructure and so on. There will be a constituency, both among Republican voters as well as Republican senators. If Biden puts forward a serious plan along these lines, it has potential actually to begin the process of uniting the country.
And that's what he says, right? He says today, he said in his speech, I want to bring America together. We're one nation, we should be proud of each other. And he has always been somebody who worked across the aisle, as they say here. He had friendships with Republican senators, like, for example, John McCain. Do you think that he, for example, will invite Republicans into his cabinet?
He probably will, and he does have a history of working across the aisle with Republican congressmen. Unfortunately for him, and one of the reasons I think people have a lot of questions about his sincerity, is that that history in the past was largely to advance a mostly neoliberal agenda, whether it was credit card company loans and bankruptcies or offshoring favorable policies. The question is, will he take that approach in a new direction?
Did you vote for him this year?
I am the president of a nonprofit organization. I don't get into endorsements or anti-endorsements or anything like that.
Yeah, because you said once, I voted for Trump, but...
I got nothing out of that.
No? Except criticism.
Exactly.
Okay. Ian, back to the conversation we had. The president seems to not let go of the White House and the power. Do you think that is temporarily? Is it just a matter of getting used to the idea that he lost these elections?
Well, I hope so, but I think it's extremely dangerous because a democracy can't function if one side doesn't accept a loss in an election. I mean, because by doing that, you declare the government illegitimate. And what it reminds me of, and a lot of false comparisons have been made in the Trump era with the 1930s. He's been called a fascist and so on. He doesn't have a coherent enough ideology to be a real fascist. He's not a fascist. But there is one thing from the past that does come back, which is that in 1918, when Germany lost World War I, on the right, you had the so-called Dolchstoßlegende, the stab-in-the-back theory.
The Dolchsteek-legende.
Yeah, we didn't really lose the war. The military didn't really lose the war. It's these Jews and communists and Republicans who stabbed us in the back. And Trump is in danger of creating a myth that's a bit like that. We didn't really lose the election. It's these disloyal Republicans and these liberals who took it away from us. If he can convince large numbers of people in the United States that this is true, that would mean that you have millions of people who don't regard the government as legitimate. And that's very, very bad for democracy.
Dangerous.
Yeah. But the thing about the other aspect of Joe Biden, and we were talking about can he unite the country, the other question is can he unite the Democrats? Because they're very divided. And those divisions are going to come up as soon as he's in office.
Then you're talking about a very left-wing of the Democratic Party.
Even the left is divided because you have the cultural warrior left, who people called woke, and who talk about gender and identity and so on. Then you have the more sort of economic Marxism left, who talk about class and the economy.
Julius, listening to all of this tonight, for me, coming from the Netherlands, it sounds not very festive or not very optimistic for the course of the country. What do you think?
I think the country has serious structural problems that have gone unaddressed for a long time, and they remain. And I agree entirely that not only is Biden constrained with the Republicans, but he faces a great deal of division within his own party. And let's not forget that he really wasn't anybody's first choice in that party. And once Trump is gone, I think he will be under immense pressure and will have a great deal holding that party together to accomplish anything.
So what about matters that are interesting for us in Europe or in the Netherlands? Do you think that Joe Biden will, for example, try to re-establish relations with NATO, with leaders like Angela Merkel in Germany, all of those?
I expect you'll see a significant change in tone and rhetoric, and he'll have no problem with fairly symbolic actions like the Paris Climate Accord.
You think it's symbolic?
Well, it has no enforcement mechanism, and ultimately what the U.S. does will be driven by internal U.S. politics, not some agreement.
You mean by money, because fracking and looking for oil in Alaska, that will all continue under a Biden presidency?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
There's no question about that. But you know, the problems within NATO are not just a matter of who's in the White House. You know, the issues, for example, in Turkey right now, a few good speeches don't change any of that. The fact that we had, you know, an ally like Turkey, which we are by treaty obligated to defend to the point of nuclear war, and we had imposed sanctions on them earlier in the Trump administration, Obama administration, is pretty incredible. And the sort of loss of purpose in NATO, the conversion of it into a sort of ersatz G20 or whatever, all these problems are going to be there. A few nice speeches are not going to solve them, though I do think he'll definitely, you know, people in Western European capitals will be very happy with the Biden administration. Eastern European, perhaps not so much.
What do you think, Ian? Probably in many parts in Europe, people are celebrating the fact that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States. But will he make a difference?
Well, I think he can make a difference because I think symbols also count. And it's not that the United States will go back to the situation that we had in the middle of the 20th century, where it's the undisputed leader of the free world and everybody. That's not going to come back.
That's all gone.
No, it's not all gone, but I think after 4 years of Trump, it'll never be quite trusted in that same way. But it's very demoralizing for democracies that are already under pressure, domestically and from the rise of China and so on, to have the United States in the hands of a demagogic populist. And the fact that there'll be a more decent president who's an internationalist, who is a Democrat, and with a small d, as well as a capital D, and so on, will raise the morale of liberal democracies everywhere, and that's valuable.
Yeah, Julius, the president-elect, Joe Biden, doesn't have a majority in the Senate, which is crucial if you want to change anything in this country. Do you regard him as a lame duck president for internal affairs, matters in the United States?
Like I said, he has a window of opportunity on certain things related to industrial policy and infrastructure. The issue vis-a-vis China and the need to treat China as an economic and technological and strategic rival, that's now more or less a bipartisan consensus. So he'll have some room to maneuver there. The other interesting part of it is, somewhat surprisingly to me actually, both candidates during this campaign called for the repeal of Section 230, which is a part of the 1996 Telecommunications Act that grants immunity to big tech platforms. It's basically a symbol of a desire to rein in the power of the big tech monopolies.
Like Facebook and Twitter.
There is a chance that they could potentially do something there as well, probably a much smaller one. And then, of course, there will be some kind of COVID stimulus package coming up. That'll be probably the first thing that Biden attempts to do. It will be much smaller, much more contentious than otherwise anticipated, but probably something will happen there.
Yeah. Let me ask you, because we are talking now about these issues. When you heard, I didn't ask you that question yet, that Biden was the president-elect, what emotion did you have by that news?
You know, I think the truth is that elections matter much less than most people think. And the underlying economic factors, structural factors will end up having a much larger role in shaping the policy and direction of the United States and the world than any particular change in who occupies the Oval Office.
There was no sense of happiness or sadness about the election of Biden.
I do my best to remain emotionless.
I can see that. Same question to you, Ian.
Well, I'm delighted that I disagree for once,
okay.
which makes it more lively.
Finally.
No, I was extremely happy, not just as somebody who's been living here, not as long as you suggest, but since 2004. But also as an admirer of the United States, but also as a European, because I think another 4 years of Trump would have done immense damage to the democratic system in the United States, and would have been, as I said, extremely demoralizing to the rest of the world that is liberal democratic and still looks to America as a model. I mean, for one thing, just Trump being there and doing what he was doing gave not only demagogues in democracies in Europe an enormous boost, but it also made it much more difficult to criticize real dictatorships on human rights grounds and so on, because they could say, what are you doing criticizing us? They're doing the same thing in America. And that's why it's very important to have a decent government. And I think it sounds sentimental, and a lot of Biden's speech was sentimental. Most American speeches are sentimental. But the emphasis on decency should not be dismissed.
So you are a happy man today.
Very happy man.
Okay. On that note, Ian Buruma, thank you so much for being here. And Julius, thank you so much for making the trip from Boston to New York, to the city that has been celebrating.